It was the smell that hit Darren first, a musty blend of mildew and varnish, like forgotten wood sealed in a box for years. He ducked into the narrow alley off Vance Street, drawn by a flickering neon sign, Gideon's Optics and Curiosities. The font was faded, almost antique, and the window display showed dusty film rolls and faded black and white portraits. Darren, a junior in college and an aspiring photographer, had been scouring the city for vintage camera gear for a project titled Ghosts of the City. He didn't expect to find much, especially not in a place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1960s. The door creaked open with a protesting groan. Inside, the air was cooler. The dim lighting cast long shadows over teetering shelves stacked with boxes, tripods, and cracked glass lenses. Behind the counter sat an old man with eyes like burnt amber. He wore a dark brown vest, white shirt, and a thin red scarf around his neck. His silver beard curled like smoke. "You looking for something particular?" the man asked, his voice thin but sharp. "I'm doing a photo project." "Looking for a classic 35mm or something unique," Darren said, brushing dust off a shelf. The man raised a hand and turned, disappearing through a curtained doorway behind the counter. Darren heard the sound of something heavy being slid across the floor, then the old man reappeared, carrying a rectangular leather case. "This one's not for sale to just anyone," he said slowly, placing it down. "But you might be the right kind." Darren opened the case carefully. Nestled inside was a camera unlike any he had ever seen. It was boxy, matte black, and devoid of any branding. The lens was a deep violet, almost like an eye. A metal plate on the bottom read simply, "Exposure number 3. "Where's it from?" Darren asked. The old man gave a tight smile. "Doesn't matter. What matters is this: never take more than one photo in the same place. Never photograph mirrors. And whatever you do, never develop the film in a darkroom alone." Darren blinked. "Is that a joke?" The man's gaze never left him. "It's a warning." Darren didn't know why he bought it. The warning was theatrical, probably part of the whole vintage mystique the old man was selling. But something about the camera intrigued him. It felt heavier than it looked. Solid. Important. Almost alive in his hands. Back at his dorm, Darren laid it on his desk and studied its details. There were no modern buttons or dials, only a single crank on the side, and a slot where the film was inserted. He carefully loaded in a roll of black and white 35mm and wound the crank with a soft click. That weekend, he walked to the abandoned skate park near the city's edge, one of his usual haunts for gritty urban shots. Rusted rails, broken concrete, graffiti-covered walls. Perfect for atmosphere. He raised the camera, framed a cracked half-pipe with wild ivy spilling into it, and clicked the shutter. Clack. A strange sound followed. Not mechanical. It sounded faintly like breathing, exhaling. Darren lowered the camera. The air felt colder. The wind had stilled. There was no one around, but a strange static filled his ears, like the kind you hear right before a power outage. He looked again at the half-pipe. Same as always. Empty. Silent. Trying to shake the unease, he packed the camera and walked back to campus. He told himself it was just the eerie mood of the place. His imagination. That night, in his small, dimly lit bathroom, he turned on his red light and began developing the film. The chemical scent clung to everything as the image began to form. His eyes narrowed. There was something wrong with the photo. In the middle of the frame, where no one had been standing, there was a figure. Slender, blurred, but unmistakably human, head tilted, limbs too long, a face lost in darkness. It stood at the edge of the half-pipe, staring straight at the camera. He rubbed his eyes, checked the negative again. The figure was on it. Embedded in the shot. His hand trembled as he clipped the photo to dry. Suddenly, the light bulb above flickered. He froze. Then, from the living room behind him, his dorm mate was gone for the weekend, he heard the distinct sound of a camera shutter. Clack. from the darkness behind the doorway. Darren spun around. Nothing. The apartment was empty, shadows stretched long under the hallway light. He stood still, breathing heavily, ears straining for sound. The distant hum of the fridge returned. No footsteps. No movement. No breath. He grabbed a flashlight and crept out of the bathroom, heart pounding. "Hello?" he called softly. His voice felt smaller than usual, like it didn't belong in the room. He checked every corner, closet, even under his bed. No sign of anyone. Trying to rationalize, Darren convinced himself it was an electrical hiccup, maybe the camera's mechanics settling. But when he returned to the bathroom, the photo he had clipped to dry was gone. His blood ran cold. He checked the floor, the sink, the wastebasket. Nothing. Just the chemical trays and the faint, metallic stink of developer. The rest of the film, still untouched, remained on the spool. Hesitating, he fed it through and continued developing the remaining shots. Slowly, they appeared one by one. Each frame was identical to what he remembered photographing, except for one detail. That same figure was in every shot. Closer. First at the edge of the frame. Then nearer to the center. Then, in the very last image, standing just feet away, head bowed low, face obscured by a wash of overexposed white, like blown-out light. It hadn't been there when he pressed the shutter. He suddenly remembered the old man's warning, never take more than one photo in the same place. He had taken 6. Darren sat awake until dawn, the camera locked in a drawer beneath stacks of textbooks. But sleep eventually pulled him under in the mid-morning haze. And while he slept, his phone, face down on his desk, clicked once. Then again. Capturing nothing. Or so it seemed. When he woke up, he found 2 new photos in his gallery. Both were of him. Sleeping. Taken from just a few feet away. The next few days blurred by in jittery wakefulness. Darren carried the camera in his backpack but didn't dare use it again. Every creak in the dorm room, every passing shadow in the hallway, every unfamiliar click made his skin crawl. He couldn't stop thinking about the photos. He hadn't taken them. He hadn't even touched his phone that night. But there they were, perfectly framed shots of him asleep, face turned toward the wall, mouth slightly open. No signs of editing. No reflection in the glass. He deleted them immediately. But that didn't bring peace. Monday afternoon, he visited Professor Manley, who taught analog photography at the college. An old-school artist with a graying ponytail and shelves of antique cameras in his office. Darren laid the prints on the desk, careful not to include the final shot where the figure stood just inches from the lens. Manley raised his thick glasses and peered down at the prints. "These were taken with a box model?" he asked, intrigued. "Yeah, old one. No name brand." The professor nodded, studying the grain structure closely. "Odd distortion," he muttered. "Like, double exposure, but not entirely. This one," he pointed to the figure in the background, "this looks added. Or, burned in later. But the negatives show it?" Darren nodded. The professor leaned back. "This reminds me of spirit photography. 19th century. People believed ghosts could be captured on film. Sometimes figures would appear during development, usually explained as tricks of light, reflections, or tampering. But this doesn't feel like a trick." Darren hesitated, then showed him the last image. The one where the figure was near. The professor went still. "This," he whispered. "This is not right. Do you see the arms?" Darren looked again. The limbs were faintly elongated, almost warped. As if they'd stretched in motion, like something crawling forward in slow time. The hands were too thin. The fingers too many. "I'd get rid of that camera if I were you," Professor Manley said, suddenly serious. But Darren couldn't. Not yet. Something compelled him to keep it. Like a whisper just beneath the edge of thought. "Take more. Show me. That night, Darren locked the camera in a metal case under his bed and placed a chair against his door. Just in case. He woke up at 3:12 a.m. The chair was toppled. The metal case was open. And the camera was sitting beside him on the pillow. Facing him. Darren screamed, bolting upright and flinging the camera across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and landed lens first on the carpet. He leapt out of bed, turned on every light, and stared at the small black box as if it might start crawling. It didn't. The air was ice cold, but the windows were shut. He checked them twice. Then he checked the door, the lock, the hallway. Empty. Quiet. But something was wrong with the silence. It was too full, too still, like the building was holding its breath. He picked up the camera, hesitating before sliding it back into the case. This time, he wrapped it in a towel, duct-taped the lid, and placed a heavy dictionary on top. Then he shoved it into the closet, deep behind laundry and shoes. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, his phone had 2 more new photos, one of him standing at the foot of his bed, the other of him holding the camera, but he didn't remember standing up, didn't remember touching it. The next day in class, Darren tried to act normal, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He confided in his friend Lexi, a photojournalism major with a fascination for haunted urban legends. After some convincing, she agreed to come over that evening. "I've seen cursed items, yeah," Lexi said, sitting cross-legged on his bed, flipping through the developed prints. "But this is different. It's not just showing something, it's interacting with you. That's rare. Creepy as hell." She held the last photo up to the light, the one with the figure closest to the lens. "I swear, it almost looks like it's looking through the camera. Like it sees you too." Darren didn't answer. He was staring at his mirror across the room. There was something in it. Faint. Barely visible in the light. A tall, thin shadow, standing just behind them. Not moving. No reflection of Lexi. No reflection of Darren. Only the figure. Lexi turned, seeing nothing. But when she looked back at the mirror, her face drained of color. Its hand was on her shoulder in the reflection. And then, it smiled. She screamed. Darren lunged and covered the mirror with a bedsheet, heart slamming against his ribs. "It's using the camera," he whispered. "It's getting closer every time I use it. Maybe even when I look at it." Lexi took a shaking breath. "Then we need to find out where it came from. And fast." The next morning, Darren and Lexi skipped class and took the bus to Vance Street. The air was unusually heavy, even though the skies were clear. The alley looked narrower than Darren remembered, the bricks darker, like they'd absorbed something they shouldn't have. They reached the spot where Gideon's Optics and Curiosities had been. Only now, there was no sign. The flickering neon was gone. The storefront was boarded up, plywood nailed hastily across the door and windows. Dust coated the wood, and faint graffiti spelled vacant in red spray paint. The glass display, once filled with lenses and vintage cameras, was shattered. A dead pigeon lay just inside. Lexi frowned. This can't be right. You were just here last week?" "Exactly here. I swear it." Darren stepped closer, knocking on the wood. No answer. No movement inside. Just stillness, deep and ancient. They walked around to the back alley, past rotting dumpsters and rusted fire escapes. Behind the building was a steel service door. Locked. Lexi kicked at it half-heartedly. "It's like it was erased." "No," Darren said, voice low. "It's like it was never really here." Back on the main street, they checked local maps on their phones. No record of a Gideon's Optics and Curiosities. Not on Yelp. Not on Google. Nothing. Even worse, Darren's photo log, which he used to document every location for his project, had a gap. A full 24 hours. The day he bought the camera was missing entirely. Lexi looked pale. Maybe the camera didn't just capture the thing. Maybe it brought it. They returned to campus before sunset, shaken and silent. That night, Lexi insisted Darren stay in her apartment across town. She was scared to leave him alone. He agreed, thankful for company. At 2:19 a.m., her camera, her own DSLR, powered on by itself, and took a photo. The shutter echoed through the dark like a gunshot. Darren sat up instantly, chest heaving. Lexi rushed to the camera. The digital screen showed the captured image. It was their room, taken from just behind the headboard. In the corner of the frame, barely visible in shadow, was a set of glowing white eyes, watching them. The next day, they met in the campus library, hiding out in a quiet back corner surrounded by shelves of dusty film photography books. Darren flipped pages with one hand and sipped from a now-cold coffee with the other. Lexi scanned the internet, searching keywords, haunted cameras, photographic entities, spirit negatives. "This is weird," she muttered. "There are tons of stories about people capturing ghosts on camera, but yours isn't just appearing. It's evolving. That's new." Darren found a passage in an old, yellowing book titled Light and Shadow, Unnatural Manifestations in Early Film. He read aloud. Some cameras, particularly handmade or prototype devices, were rumored to carry with them soul stains, imprints of suffering or intent. These were not traditional hauntings, but parasitic entities drawn to the act of capturing life. They do not merely observe. They inhabit. And eventually, they consume. Lexi leaned in. "That's it. That sounds like your camera." "I think it's growing stronger," Darren whispered. "At first, it was just in the background. Now it's in mirrors. Now it's showing up in other cameras. Mine. Yours." She shuddered. "It's following you." Later that night, back in Lexi's apartment, they carefully examined the black camera again. It hadn't moved since Darren locked it in a shoebox lined with aluminum foil and duct tape, but both of them still felt something radiating from it. Like low static. Like being stared at. Lexi stared at the lens. "Why is it so dark? It's like looking into ink." Suddenly, the lens twitched, only for a split second. Like an eyelid. Both of them jumped. Then came a soft whisper. Barely audible, like it was coming from deep inside the camera body. "More light." They stumbled backward. Darren slammed the lid shut, heart thundering. But the whisper had done something. Triggered something. Across the room, Lexi's wall mirror fogged up from the inside. Slowly, a message began to appear as if written by a finger on glass. "Do not erase me." Lexi stepped forward, trembling. "Darren, it's learning. It doesn't just want pictures anymore." Darren nodded slowly, staring at the dark shoebox. "It wants a place to live." They barely slept. The air in Lexi's apartment had grown heavy, like moisture clinging to their skin, impossible to shake. Every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, even Lexi's laptop screen, seemed to darken slightly when they weren't looking. The next day, they decided to meet with someone outside their circle, an urban folklorist named Professor Galen Ludier. Lexi had taken his seminar on digital hauntings the previous year. He was eccentric, brilliant, and deeply fascinated by the intersection of old technology and the supernatural. His office was buried in the anthropology wing, behind a hallway of ancient filing cabinets and peeling posters. As Darren unwrapped the camera, Galen raised his thick brows, intrigued. "I've seen a lot of haunted objects," he said, examining it with gloved fingers. "But this one's not just haunted. It's active." "Active how?" Lexi asked. Galen leaned forward. "There's a theory, one I've researched for years, about residual entities trapped in early photographic devices. Some believed cameras could do more than capture a moment. They could trap a piece of it. If the lens was hand-ground or the shutter custom-made, the material could absorb emotion, pain, grief, obsession." He squinted through the violet lens. "This one's different. It's not holding a moment. It's holding something else. Something alive. Darren told him about the figure appearing in the photos, the message on the mirror, the whisper from the camera itself. Galen's face grew pale. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old folder labeled exposure cases. Inside were copies of faded reports, most of them newspaper clippings, unexplained disappearances, sudden deaths of amateur photographers, strange scratches in walls and floors resembling long, dragging fingers. In one photo, grainy and sepia-toned, Darren saw a man holding an identical camera. Same box shape. Same dark lens. The photo's caption read, "Edwin Rallister, found deceased in his darkroom." Final print depicted an entity not visible to the naked eye. Lexi pointed to the nameplate on the old photo of the camera. In tiny, smudged script. "Exposure number 2. Yours is number 3, Galen whispered. "These things, they're not cameras. They're doors." Darren suddenly felt nauseous. Lexi stared at the image. "What happened to the other ones?" Galen hesitated. "No one knows. But every person who used one vanished. Or worse." Lexi was quiet during the ride home. Darren could tell she was thinking the same thing he was, about the people who had used exposure number 1 and number 2. About how they didn't just die, they disappeared. The thought clung to him like wet fabric. They returned to Lexi's apartment just before dusk. The shoebox containing the camera was still in the closet, untouched. But when Lexi opened her laptop to check on the files they'd scanned earlier, she found something new. A folder had appeared on her desktop. Unlabeled. Inside were dozens of photos. All in black and white. All of Darren. Sleeping. Sitting. Staring into mirrors. And in each one, the figure, the negative man, grew closer. In the final photo, Darren was lying on the floor, eyes open, pale and lifeless. The figure crouched over him, long hands gripping his shoulders, its face now partially visible, mouth stretched unnaturally wide, filled with jagged teeth. Lexi slammed the lid shut. "That's not a premonition," Darren muttered. "That's a threat." That night, Lexi made a plan. "We burn the negatives. All of them. And we destroy the camera. We break the chain before it finds another host." Darren hesitated. Something in his chest resisted. A strange pull. The camera didn't want to be destroyed. It wanted more. Still, he nodded. "Yeah. Tonight." They went to the roof of her apartment building around midnight, carrying a metal trash can, lighter fluid, and every negative Darren had developed. The prints fluttered in the wind, some still wet with chemical residue. As Lexi poured fluid over the photos, Darren watched them curl and blacken in the flames. And that's when he heard it. A whisper, not in his ears this time, but inside his head. "You took me in, you gave me shape, you will see me clear." He gasped, clutching his temple. Lexi lit the final match and dropped it into the bin. Flames whooshed up, engulfing the photos. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, a face appeared in the fire. Not in the flames. In the reflection of the flames in the chrome lid of the trash can. A gaunt face, featureless except for wide, lidless eyes. Darren stumbled backward. "It's still here." Lexi turned. "Then tomorrow, we destroy the source." Darren nodded slowly. The camera. Morning came with no birdsong, no warmth. Just a low, oppressive gray that clung to everything. Darren barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure in new places, in windows, puddles, even his own reflection. It wasn't just in the photos anymore. It was in the world now. Lexi had already cleared a space in the backyard behind her apartment complex, laying down a concrete slab and gathering tools, a crowbar, a heavy wrench, a hammer, even an old camping axe. She'd seen enough horror movies to know one thing: when you destroy something cursed, you make sure it's destroyed. The camera sat in the middle of a steel tray, wrapped in its towel, now slightly singed from being near the fire the night before. They stood over it in silence. "Ready?" Lexi asked, gripping the wrench. Darren nodded and pulled off the towel. Even in daylight, the lens was unnatural. Still too dark. Still bottomless. Light didn't reflect off it, it vanished into it. Like it was absorbing everything. Lexi raised the wrench and brought it down hard. Clang. The wrench bounced back. No damage. She tried again. The metal screamed, but the camera didn't even crack. "Okay," she hissed. "Plan B." She passed Darren the axe. He hesitated only a second, then raised it high and brought it down with a shout. Crack. This time, the lens shattered. But not in shards. It dissolved into black dust, curling away like smoke. The rest of the body followed, twisting and writhing on the metal tray like it was alive, until it collapsed into a pile of oily ash. Darren stepped back, panting. Lexi stared. "It's gone?" But then, from inside the pile, a faint, metallic click. Like a shutter. Then, another. Louder. And again. And again. Click. Clack. Click. Clack. Suddenly, the ash rose, swirling into the air like a cyclone, and formed a rough humanoid shape, twitching and stuttering, as if made from torn film and light leaks. Eyes opened. White. Burning. It was free. Lexi screamed. Darren grabbed her arm, and they ran, stumbling through the side gate, sprinting toward the apartment. Behind them, the clicking continued. Like thousands of cameras snapping frames in the dark. Each one closer. They didn't stop running until they reached the front of Lexi's apartment. Darren fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped them. Behind them, there was no chase, no footsteps, no sounds at all, but both of them felt the weight of eyes. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Watching. Once inside, Lexi slammed the door and locked both deadbolts. They collapsed on the couch, gasping. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. "It wasn't human. Not even a ghost. That thing was built from shadows." Darren's voice trembled. "It was in the camera. And we let it out." He checked the windows. Nothing outside but trees. No movement. But in every shiny surface, the microwave, the TV, the glass picture frame, Darren could see flickers of motion. The image of the negative man, always in the corner of his eye, too fast to focus on. "It's photonic," he muttered. "It's become part of the light now. It doesn't need the camera anymore. It is the camera." Lexi reached for her laptop, thinking maybe they could upload something, find help, contact a paranormal expert online. But the moment the screen lit up, there it was. The homepage background had changed. No icons. No menu. Just a live feed. Of them. Sitting on the couch. But the camera wasn't on. Lexi hadn't activated anything. She slammed it shut. "We're screwed," she said breathlessly. "It's not haunting photos, it's haunting light itself." Darren felt something pulling at his mind again, that whispering static that had begun the moment he developed the first photo. It was stronger now, shaping into something clearer. A message. "You've seen me. But now, I will see through you." He looked at Lexi, his face pale. "I think it wants to become permanent. It wants to burn itself into our eyes. Our minds. Until we start seeing it everywhere." Lexi stood up. "No. We need to go deeper. If this thing is a copy of light and image, maybe we can trap it in its own medium again. Somewhere we control." Darren blinked. "Like a darkroom?" "No. Deeper." She pointed to her VR headset and DSLR. "What if we trap it in a false reality, a photographic simulation? Make a digital space and trick it back inside? Darren stared at her. You want to lure it into a virtual camera? Yes, Lexi said, fire in her voice. But we'll need a perfect replica of that old camera's optics. Same exposure settings. Same shutter delay. Darren swallowed hard. Then let's build it. For the next 3 days, they didn't sleep. They turned Lexi's spare room into a makeshift lab, computers, circuit boards, camera parts, wires snaking across the floor like tangled vines. Lexi wore noise-canceling headphones while coding the simulation. Darren worked from sketches and memory, reconstructing the exposure number 3 lens using salvaged DSLR parts and a 3D printer borrowed from the engineering department. The goal was insane: build a digital version of the cursed camera, then trick the entity into entering it. If it was bound to a machine once, Lexi reasoned, then maybe it can be bound again. But this time, we trap it in data. Ones and zeros. A prison without light. Will it know? Darren asked one night, his voice low. Lexi didn't look up from her keyboard. Probably. They didn't talk about the sightings, the flickers in the mirrors, the lights turning off on their own, the shadows that moved wrong. Darren stopped checking his reflection. Every time he did, he saw a second version of himself standing just a little too still, with pupils that didn't dilate. On the 4th night, they ran their first test. Lexi placed the completed replica camera in the center of the room. It looked nearly identical to exposure number 3, down to the black matte texture and faint violet lens, but this one wasn't real. It was a shell, housing sensors and VR fiber feeds connected to her computer. Darren hesitated before turning it on. The air around it already felt colder. You ready? She asked. He nodded. Lexi began the simulation, an artificial darkroom, coated in photorealistic detail. A floating environment fed into a screenless VR headset, pulsing softly in the dark. Then she whispered, "Come see yourself." They left the room. At first, nothing happened. Then the hallway lights flickered. A low click echoed from the room, not mechanical. Wet. Like bones snapping in water. And then, the camera turned itself. Slowly. Deliberately. Facing the doorway. The fake lens narrowed, like an eye adjusting. On Lexi's monitor, within the simulation, something stirred. A new form, warped, oily, barely humanoid, stepped into the artificial darkroom. It was in. Darren gripped her shoulder. Lexi, it's working. But Lexi's eyes widened in horror. She pointed at the monitor. Inside the simulation, the entity was splitting. One version was standing still, trapped. But another one was watching them through the simulation screen. One of me for one of you. The real-world replica camera let out a long, rattling shutter snap. Darren screamed. His reflection vanished from the window behind him. Darren stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a tangled HDMI cable. He turned sharply, heart hammering against his ribs, and looked again at the glass window behind him. His reflection was gone. Not distorted. Not hidden behind glare. Gone. Lexi's reflection was still there, panicked, mouth slightly open. But Darren's? Nothing. No movement. No outline. He turned to her, trembling. I don't see myself. Anywhere. Lexi's eyes darted around. Check the mirror. He ran to the bathroom. Same thing. The mirror reflected the sink, the towel rack, the toothpaste on the counter, but no Darren. Lexi, he yelled. She followed him in, eyes wide. Oh my God. Darren turned slowly, lifting his arm. I can still see myself, right? Yeah, she whispered. You're here. You're real. But it's like the light won't touch you anymore. Suddenly, the camera in the spare room began to whine, a high, metallic tone like a reel of film unraveling too fast. On the computer monitor, the figure in the simulation froze mid-step. Its head jerked sharply toward the screen. Trade accepted. The screen glitched, first into lines, then into static. Lexi dove for the kill switch and yanked the cable. The room went dark. But the replica camera didn't power down. It began vibrating, softly at first, then violently, the lens spinning like a miniature hurricane. Darren and Lexi backed away as a gust of freezing air blew through the room, sucking the warmth from their skin. And then, a shape rose out of the lens. Black mist. Tendrils of static. A figure forming, tall and angular, stretching against the walls like a funhouse shadow. It had no face, just a white blur where eyes should be, and a long, slanted grin filled with photographic noise, grain, burn marks, and the jagged remnants of torn negatives. Lexi screamed. The replica had failed. They hadn't contained it. They'd freed it again. Darren fell to his knees, clutching his head. He could feel it inside his mind, clawing its way through the dark recesses of thought and memory. It wasn't just copying his image anymore. It was becoming him. Lexi yanked Darren to his feet. He was pale, dazed, pupils dilated like someone waking from anesthesia. His body moved, but not with the usual rhythm. His steps were stiff, jerky, like someone else was pulling the strings. "Darren, look at me," Lexi said, gripping his face. "Do you know who I am?" His lips parted. For a moment, nothing came out. Then, in a voice just a shade too deep, he said, "Light reveals all." Lexi's breath hitched. That wasn't his voice. "Darren," she said again, firmer this time. "Fight it. Whatever it's doing, don't let it take your shape." He blinked. His body shuddered, and suddenly he staggered back, gripping his temples. "It's in me," he gasped. "It's showing me, its world." Lexi didn't understand at first. But then Darren raised his head, eyes unfocused. "I see rooms. Dark rooms. With walls made of glass, and people inside, screaming. Every face it ever copied, stuck in a frame. Forever." She swallowed hard. "Like a gallery?" He nodded weakly. "But one you never leave." Then his breath caught. He turned sharply to the window, then to her, and whispered, "It's not just following light anymore." Lexi backed up. "What do you mean?" "It's learning to make light." The lights above them flickered, then surged, glowing white-hot for a moment before bursting in a cascade of sparks. The computer screen blinked back on, showing a photo of Lexi from behind. But she hadn't moved. And no camera was active. She turned, terrified, and looked behind her. Nothing. Empty hallway. But in the next second, the screen updated. Another photo. Closer now. The back of her head. As if someone, or something, was inches away. Lexi spun again. Still nothing. Click. This time, the sound came from inside the walls. The photos were no longer being taken with cameras. The house itself was taking them. The drywall groaned around them like old leather. Electrical sockets buzzed, oozing static. Lexi stared at the glowing monitor, jaw clenched tight. Each photo on screen was dated and timestamped, seconds apart, getting closer, sharper, more vivid. Photo 1, Lexi, back, 7:43 p.m. Photo 2, Lexi, back, slight turn, 7:43 and 2 seconds p.m. Photo 3, Lexi, shoulder angle, subject alert, 7:43 and 5 seconds p.m. By the fifth photo, Lexi could see herself screaming, but she hadn't screamed yet. Darren pulled her away from the desk. "We have to go. Right now." But the house had locked them in. The front door clicked shut on its own. Every window now reflected not reality but photo negatives, sepia-tinted inversions of their own living room, with dark stains spreading across the floorboards like developing chemicals. Upstairs, Lexi gasped. "Attic." They ran. The staircase groaned under each step, the walls trembling as more photos blinked into existence behind them, appearing not just on screens, but in picture frames nailed into the wood, like the house was constructing its own gallery. The attic was choked with old furniture, tarps, and dust. Lexi reached into a box and yanked out an antique flashbulb camera, her grandfather's, a pre-digital relic she once promised she'd restore. She remembered it had one last roll of undeveloped film in it. She turned to Darren. "If it's using cameras to hunt us, maybe we can fight it with one." He shook his head. "What if that makes it stronger? We're out of options." A sudden thump came from the ceiling above them. Lexi froze. "Isn't this the top floor?" They looked up. There was another attic door. One they'd never seen before. Click. 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 Photos began sliding out of the cracks between floorboards. Developed instantly, curling at the edges like dried leaves. Lexi picked one up. It showed the two of them standing exactly where they were now, but with a third person behind them. A figure in black, arms raised, holding a massive lens where a head should be. "It's printing the moment we die." Darren turned slowly, raising the camera. "Then let's ruin the shot." Darren gripped the old flashbulb camera tightly, sweat making his hands slippery against the cracked leather grip. The bulb was still intact. Lexi fumbled through the camera bag, finding the winding crank and clicking it into place. "Say when," she whispered. Thump. Another heavy impact from above. Dust rained down from the attic ceiling, the trapdoor vibrating like something large was crawling across it. Thump. Thump. Then came the metallic squeal of the hidden door creaking open, slow and deliberate. Darren aimed the camera at the square of darkness above. "Now." Flash. The bulb exploded in a blinding burst of light. It lit the entire attic in a surreal, almost clinical glow. For just a second, everything stilled, like the world held its breath. Then came the scream. It wasn't human. It sounded like film unraveling and fire tearing through a darkroom all at once. The figure dropped from the ceiling, a blur of black cloth and jagged angles, hitting the floor hard. Its head pulsed, a massive lens rotating madly, the iris opening and closing like a blinking eye. The flash had hurt it. But only for a second. Lexi dragged Darren back toward the attic door. "We need more film." "No time." The figure twisted and snapped a photo with its own body. A burst of spectral light filled the room, and Darren's right arm began to fade, first color, then shape, then existence, like it was being edited out of reality. "Geo," he screamed, pushing her down the ladder. Lexi hit the floor running. Darren followed, gripping the stuttering, weakening camera like a lifeline. As they burst into the hallway, more photographs fell from the ceiling like dead leaves. Each showed them, frozen mid-motion, but each time, they were blurrier, less defined, their features dissolving. It wasn't just documenting them anymore. It was erasing them. Lexi spotted the basement door and yanked it open. "Darkroom," she shouted. "If this thing came from photography, we end it where it was born." They tumbled into the basement, slamming the door behind them just as another spectral flash lit up the stairwell. Down below, surrounded by chemicals, negatives, and reels of forgotten film, Lexi finally understood. The thing chasing them wasn't a ghost. It was a photo of a ghost, trapped in the process of becoming real. And now it wanted to finish developing, by taking their places. The basement was cold. Too cold. The kind of cold that clings to your bones like damp film stock left too long in fixer. Lexi slammed the heavy door and threw the bolt. "That won't hold up forever," she panted. Darren sat against the wall, cradling his half-vanished arm. The skin around the discolored void flickered with grainy static, like it was being rewritten, or wiped away. The room around them was filled with ancient photographic equipment. Enlargers, trays of developer and stop bath, racks lined with dusty negatives. Strings of red lights bathed the darkroom in a bloody hue. Darren stared at the walls. "This is where it started," he whispered. "Look." Dozens of old photographs were pinned to corkboards and strung along wires, portraits in varying stages of decay. Some were blurred beyond recognition, others had faces scratched out, or worse, replaced. Lexi stepped closer. Each photo had a name on the back, all handwritten in the same shaky cursive. Marlene W., vanished 1979. Thomas R., lost 1983. M. Bryce, missing 1992. A. Ruskin, deleted 1999. Every person it's ever taken, Lexi murmured. She lifted a large contact sheet. On it were 12 shots of a young woman, each more distorted than the last. In the final frame, her face had been entirely replaced by the same black lens they'd seen upstairs. Darren groaned. It's still up there. Watching. Waiting. Lexi looked at the camera. We can use this place. The chemicals. The negatives. The light. This is where it was born, so maybe we can undevelop it. Suddenly, the red lights above them pulsed. The door creaked. Not open, but inward. As if the wood itself was expanding, distorting like overexposed film. Through the warped surface, they saw a photo forming, of the very basement they stood in, complete with two blurry figures huddled near the sink. It was taking the room itself. It's turning this into a frame, Lexi said, grabbing the camera. Darren pulled a roll of undeveloped film from a drawer. Then we trap it in one. She had no idea if it would work. But it was a dark room. It obeyed different rules, photographic rules. Chemical. Chemical. Flash. Fix. If they could process the entity back into a negative, they might lock it in for good. But first, they had to survive the final shot. Lexi unspooled the undeveloped film carefully, feeding it into the enlarger. Her fingers trembled. Darren staggered to the chemical table, his form still flickering and unstable. The camera sat between them, loaded with the last intact flashbulb. A timer ticked overhead, slow and deliberate, like the heartbeat of the room itself. You ever processed film manually? Lexi asked, not looking up. Once, Darren replied, teeth gritted. In high school. I got a B. That's gonna have to be good enough. Creak. The wood warped again. The basement door curved and cracked like soft wax. A single black iris bloomed in the center of it, a lens, forming out of the wood like a boil. Click. A pulse of cold shot through the room. All the photos hanging from the wire snapped to attention, fluttering like they were alive, staring down with hundreds of faded, miserable faces. Ready? Darren whispered. Lexi nodded. Let's develop a ghost. The door exploded inward, not with fire or noise, but with light. The figure emerged from it in pieces, like a collage stitched from the darkest parts of photography, arms made of shutter blades, a face composed of glass and aperture, feet dragging long, frayed strips of film. It hissed. Not with a voice, but with static, the sound of tape being rewound too fast. And then, another photo flashed, unprovoked. The enlarger above the tray clicked on, exposing the raw film to light. Lexi snatched the print and dunked it into the developer tray. The black and white image bloomed slowly, a figure forming in its grainy surface. Trap it, she muttered, willing it to work. Darren aimed the flashbulb camera at the thing as it surged toward them. Flash. A burst of searing white. The creature shrieked and flinched, shuddering like the very pixels in its form were melting. Lexi dropped the photograph into the stop bath. Its shriek grew louder. Its form flickered. The last tray, fixer. She held the print under the pale chemical bath as the figure lunged, hands of blades outstretched, lens spinning. SSSSSSSSSS. Its scream turned into a long, high-pitched tone, like a machine powering down. And then, stillness. The photo in Lexi's trembling hands showed the thing mid-lunge. Trapped in motion. Its body grainy. Unmoving. Rendered flat. Rendered, final. She held it up to the light. The negative was complete. It was locked. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the peaceful kind, this silence was hollow, dense, and oppressive. It was the silence of something being erased. Lexi and Darren stared at the photograph, now resting gently in the fixer tray, motionless. The creature, the lens thing, the anomaly, was captured mid-lunge, its glass eye frozen in a twisted reflection of horror and rage. Darren exhaled. We got it." Lexi shook her head. "I don't know. It feels like we did, but it's not over. Look." She gestured to the walls. The other photos, the ones strung on the wires and pinned up across the corkboards, were still fluttering slightly, as if breathing. And then, one by one, they began to curl inward, folding themselves like dying flowers. Pop. Snap. Rip. Faces vanished from the images. The names on the backs bled into the paper, smudged like spilled ink. Some of the photographs burned from within, holes forming in their centers and spreading outward. And from the corner of the room came a new noise. A camera shutter clicking. Slowly. Click. 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 Lexi turned. The vintage camera, the one they'd used to trap the entity, was vibrating softly on the metal table. It clicked again. A photo slid out. Just one. Lexi grabbed it. Darren peered over her shoulder. It was a new photo. Their eyes widened. It showed the basement. Them, Lexi and Darren. Standing exactly as they were right now. But behind them, in the shadow near the sink, stood a faint, unfocused figure. "No," Lexi whispered. The door above creaked again. Not loud. Just enough. Enough to say, "You were never the photographer." They were in a frame now. A sequence. A story. A photo. The thing had been trapped in a negative. But something else, another piece of it, had gotten away. "Lexi," Darren said, voice cracking. "It took our picture." "We need to burn it," she replied, backing toward the tray. "All of it. The negatives. The prints. Even the chemicals." She poured the fixer out onto the floor. Darren lit a match and dropped it into the pool. The fire erupted, licking across the chemical-soaked tile. Flames danced up the walls, curling the last of the photos into ash. As they backed away, the camera melted, shrieking one last time before collapsing in on itself like a black hole of glass. The photo in Lexi's hand, of them standing there, burned slowly, catching last. Their silhouettes glowed orange before finally disappearing. And then, darkness. Ashes drifted down like snow. The basement had gone still, truly still this time. The hum of electricity, the tapping of developing fluid, the quiet rustle of air between old photographs, all gone. Silence now felt clean. Lexi and Darren stood outside, backs against the rusted door that once led into the darkroom. They watched the smoke rise into the dusky air, curling into the violet clouds above. Sirens echoed in the distance, faint and directionless. Darren was pale, blistered along one side of his arm. Lexi had blood along her temple from where she'd hit the wall earlier. Neither said anything for a long while. Then, "I keep expecting to hear it," Darren muttered. "The shutter. Just clicking." Lexi nodded. "Me too." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small item, a strip of melted plastic and blackened glass, the remnants of the last photo that had printed. It had somehow stayed with her, half-burned, the image barely visible now. Still, if you tilted it just right, you could almost make out their shapes. And behind them, something. A smudge. Neither of them could decide if it had always been there, or if the fire had made it. "You think we got all of it?" Darren asked. Lexi didn't answer right away. She stared at the smudge, her jaw tight. "I think we got what it was trying to be. But, whatever made it? That might still be out there." He didn't ask what she meant. The weight of it hung between them like fog. They parted without another word. Candle months passed. Lexi never went back to her freelance work. Her camera stayed locked in a trunk under her bed. Sometimes she'd walk past old photo booths on the street and feel her chest seize up. She refused to take selfies, refused to be in any pictures at all. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered to a second-hand bookstore. Something to quiet her nerves. A man behind the counter smiled. Looking for anything in particular? She shook her head, but her eyes caught on a display behind him. A freshly printed photography book, stark and minimalist. Title: The Negative Space. Author: unknown. The cover photo? A blurred hallway. Old wallpaper. And just barely visible in the grain, a girl holding a camera, looking directly into the lens. Lexi's blood turned to ice. She stepped closer. And right as she reached for it, click. From somewhere inside the store. A shutter. A soft flash. The bulb above flickered. She turned sharply, but no one was there. No camera. No photographer. No sound at all. Just the books. Just the hush. Just the stillness. And deep inside it, she swore she heard something whisper. Say cheese.